Good insert time of day here, adventurers. Welcome back to D&D 20, where we talk about everything Dungeons and Dragons. In today's video, we're looking at the situation where you're just getting into the game, or your character just died and you're making a new one to continue, and you look at your options and, oh no, what am I going to do? There's so many choices and I don't know what to pick. Well, fear not. This is the video for you. Stick through till the end and you will know exactly what class you want to play for your next Dungeons & Dragons character. So to start with, let's decide, are we going to be the Tinker Gnome Artificer who's turning his tinkerings into support items? Are we going to be the Half-Orc Barbarian who's more brute than brain? Are we going to be the Half-Elf Bard who has more support and utility than anybody could ever dream of? Are you going to be a Hill Dwarf Cleric who's spreading the word of your god across all the lands? Are you going to be the Furbolg Druid who uses his animal shapes to be a wolf at certain points and a spider or a hawk at another? Are you going to be the Warforged Fighter who was forged in the bowels of Mount Doom to combat Sauron himself? Are you going to be the Wood Elf Monk who uses his natural speed to increase his skilled martial arts combat prowess, the ability to get in and out unerringly? Or perhaps you'll be a variant ASMR Paladin, a holy warrior bound to an oath that decides how you will act in all situations. Or maybe you want to be a halfling ranger who uses your small size and your ability to have a beast companion to attack from the skies as you're on top of your winged mount, raining death from above. Or maybe you want to be a high elf rogue who's using your additional cantrip to enhance your skills as an arcane trickster. Perhaps you want to be a dragonborn sorcerer using your scales to deflect damage that other weaker spellcasters would never be able to avoid. Or maybe you want to be a tiefling warlock, a devilish being who's made a devilish pact with an eldritch being for power. Or perhaps you are the human wizard who has recognized his mortality and has learned how to weave spells together in such a way as to overcome that innate weakness. Whatever you want to be, any race, any class, it is completely up to you. So let's take a closer look into each of these classes so that you can decide what it is you want to do. If you choose to be an Artificer, you'll find that you're part of a very unique class that focuses more on their items than on anything else. You'll be crafting potions or turning suits of armor into walking mech suits. You might turn wands into firearms, or you'll craft a friend to defend yourself in combat. It's perfect for a Tinker Gnome, but that's just a personal roleplay belief. It'd be perfect for whatever you want. The Artificer is an awesome support and utility class that makes magical items to help everybody out. Their biggest advantage is, in fact, the infusions that they use to create those magic items. They do have some weaknesses, and it's due to their uniqueness. Because of the fact that they are set up the way they are, it gets in the way of their actual effectiveness. Very little in spell slots, and being an intelligence-based class, they don't get much use out of it, at least until level 7, where they get Flash of Genius, which means at the beginning you'll feel very underwhelming. You're also underwhelming in physical combat. If you're a primary spellcaster, you'll have very few actual damage, buff, or control spells because you're focused mainly on utility. And if you're going for a subclass that focuses on combat, you'll find that your D8 hit dice lets you down more often than not. So your main strengths come outside of combat with those tinker items that help the other party members. So great for support and great for outside of combat, but in combat you'll find that you'll feel a little outperformed by your comrades. If you decide that you want to play a barbarian, such as Grog, you'll find that you're pretty much the Hulk in a Dungeons & Dragons setting. You're a meathead, but that also makes roleplay very easy, and it makes you phenomenal in combat. All of your ability points are going to go into your strength and con, and it's going to produce quite the effective combatant, even if it doesn't produce much outside of combat. You're pretty much the king of melee damage, Your rage is super helpful as far as creating damage, and on top of that, it halves the damage of non-magical melee attacks coming at you, which helps your HP, which comes from the highest hit die, by the way, go that much further. But as I said, their weakness is that because they're the beefiest character, there's not a whole lot of utility. They're pretty much useless outside of situations where we can say, go here and hit that. If you can't punch, kick, or bite your way out of a situation, as a barbarian, you're not going to provide a whole lot of help, but you can still provide a good deal of roleplay, provide an interesting character, and in combat, you will be an unparalleled beast. If you want to play a bard, and you want to play it correctly, you have your work cut out for you. Anybody that has seen a bard played correctly will tell you that they're the most powerful class in 5e, but they're very difficult to play. It requires a lot of leaning into roleplay. It requires a lot of thinking outside of the box because of the way that their spell list is set up. And so if you don't understand how to think outside of the box and use spells in ways that are out of character for what you would normally expect, you might struggle some. But if you want to be a silly, clever, and powerful spellcaster, the bard is definitely going to be the class for you. They're a jack of all trades. They're a perfect skill monkey. They can fit into so many situations. A lore bard gets you extra spells. A valor bard gets you use with shields and better physical combat abilities. Because of this, there's also glaring weaknesses. Everything has to be balanced in 5e. And the biggest weakness with them is the amount of role-playing that's really necessary to make a bard work properly. As I said, it requires a lot of thinking outside of the box and unique scenarios. And if you're not somebody that feels comfortable being the face of the party, the bard is probably going to be one of, if not the most difficult class to play. But if you don't mind leaning into the roleplay, if you don't mind doing a lot of talking with the other players or the NPCs, and you don't mind being the guy that's thinking of, well, how can I use this in a unique way? I would definitely recommend the bard. If you want a highly versatile class, you can't really go wrong with the Cleric. When people think of the Cleric, they normally think of the quiet guy that stands off in the back and heals people. And while a 5e Cleric can indeed do that, they've added so much versatility to it. You can be the guy that's wearing heavy armor, wielding a mace, and summoning lightning bolts with one hand while mass party healing with the other. You have a ton of versatility and a long list of roles that you can fill depending on the domain that you pick. They do largely focus on healing, which is great. You can heal yourself, you can heal your comrades, you can keep everybody going. And outside of that, you have class features that come from your domains, which, like I said, let you pick from pretty much any role that you want to be, because there is nothing that a cleric cannot do. But because they do lean a little more towards healing, some people consider it kind of a boring job. I really don't think so, because I find it interesting that you're supporting your characters or your players by using your spell slots wisely and keeping an eye on how to use them, because you have that so much that you can do, but you have to be careful because you have so many things that require concentration and so many different roles you can fill, but you can't fill them all at once. But because of that, it's a glaring weakness. What are you supposed to do? You're going to be in a situation where you can do a lot, but you can't do a whole lot because you have to put yourself into a niche. And when that niche is no longer what you need, well, you're stuck there. Now, if you like the idea of being a support character, but the cleric just doesn't seem right for you, you definitely might want to look at being a druid. These are really cool support classes with a ton of versatility. You can sneak like a rogue by turning into a giant spider. You want to deal damage like a barbarian, turn into a brown bear. Want to heal everybody? You've got spells for that. You can do so many different things as a druid character that the class itself is almost broken in how great it can be. Your wild shape ability to turn into all these different animals is great, but it's balanced by making sure that a lot of those monsters or creatures you can turn into have low ACs and are therefore easy to hit. You're a full spellcaster, so you get spells all the way up to 9th level, and you have some combat ability, but keep in mind that once you're taken out of your wild shape and you run out of those, your combat ability goes way down due to your low hit die. And on top of that, you don't have access to big damage spells, so even though you go all the way up to 9th level, you have low AC, and you don't get spells like Fireball. So this means that at early levels, it feels like a slog once you run out of wild shapes, because your cantrips aren't very powerful, and your spells are not going to produce the kind of damage that other spellcasters are looking at. Still a solid choice though, and like I said, the class itself is almost broken. Another fine option is going to be being a fighter. Fighters are meant to be the best damage dealers and soak up damage. Outside of combat, there's a limited amount that they can do for roleplay because they are so combat oriented, but there's still stuff that you can do. You can choose an Eldritch Knight subclass so that you have access to magic and your intelligence goes up and provides you some more roleplay situations, although intelligence is one of, if not the least important stat. You can be a battle master and be a tactical warrior as opposed to just a meathead that's just hack and slash. So there's definitely some great options here. The amount of extra attacks you get, I mean, at 2nd level you're given skills that allow you to heal yourself. You get an extra round of attack in combat features, plus the extra attacks with level 5, 11, and 20 ensure that you are the epitome of a damage dealer. But while you are amazing at fighting, like I said, you lack versatility outside of combat. So just like with the Barbarian, if you can't punch, kick, bite, or wrestle your way out of a situation, you're probably going to have to step back and let some of the more versatile characters take the spotlight. Now, if you're interested in being a dexterity-based character that's basically a ninja, Monk is going to be the way to go for you. They're great support characters, and they have the ability to move through combat with relative ease. They can go where the fighting is thickest and get out of difficult situations. They're good in close combat and have great things like key points to help them become even better. It's not going to be what you want to pick if you want to be the strongest character in the party, but they do offer a unique playstyle that can be an indispensable asset to the party when played correctly. Because you're a dexterity-based character, you're super hard to hit. You can deal a fair amount of damage with finesse weapons, and you can sneak around really well like a ninja. But there are some weaknesses. You're a melee fighting class, but you have a low hit die, so even though you're hard to hit, when you are hit, you'll go down fairly easily. You do have ways to balance this out, like your key points and your ability to get in and out of combat, but there's no way to get around that. And you have some feats that come in handy at a range distance, but they're limited, and you're going to need to, in order to play the monk correctly and use them to their fullest ability, you're going to have to be in the thick of combat, which is dangerous for your low HP. So just keep that in mind if you go this way. Now, if you want to be a tanky, high-damaging warrior that also has access to spells, the Holy Crusader, known as the Paladin, is going to be the way to go for you. You have different Oaths of Devotion, which offer you different spells and unique abilities. You're super high in charisma, so you can be charming, you can be intimidating, you can be whatever you want. You use your spell slots for Divine Smites, which means when you use a melee attack and you attack with your sword, which you do get extra attacks, by the way, but when you attack with your sword or your axe, you add on the smite damage, and you just greatly increase the amount of damage that you're putting out there. And you're super tanky, you could get access to all armor and all weapons, so you've got that going for you. So from the very beginning, you're set up pretty well. And being a semi-spellcaster, you get spells all the way up to 5th levels. Slots, you have a limited pool of spells to draw from, and you have limited spell slots, but it still works really well for augmenting your ability as a martial character. And because of the way they're set up, you have healing ability and utility and support, so you're basically an awesome battlefield medic. But because it's a charisma-based character and the way it's set up, you do, again, just like with the Bard, have to lean really strong into roleplay. And if you're not great with roleplay, if you're not good at sticking to an oath or interacting with people, you're going to struggle with using a Paladin as effectively as you would other martial classes. But as long as you're okay with leaning into roleplay and following the code of your oath, I don't think you can go much better as far as a martial class. Now maybe you like Strider, you know, Aragorn. And if that's the case, then you might want to be a ranger. Rangers are generally considered to be one of, if not the weakest class in D&D, but that doesn't mean that they're weak. And when used right, they are fantastic threats. They're the skilled hunters, trackers, and woodsmen that sit on the edge of society, and they're the first line of defense from the threats of the wild. Now, in certain situations, they are one of, if not the best characters, because they have things like preferred enemy and preferred terrain, favored enemy and preferred terrain, which means that in your preferred terrains and against your preferred enemies, you deal fantastic damage. You have high wisdom, so you're good at perceiving things. You have high dex, so you're hard to hit, and you deal great damage with finesse weapons. You have interesting area of effect spells that can damage multiple foes and give you some battlefield control. So there are plenty of situations in which you do great. However, this is also the weakness, because because you're dealing with your favorite enemy or your preferred terrain, everything that you do and are relying on is very situational. So if you're not in a situation where you're in your favorite terrain or against a preferred enemy, then your ability in the game is severely limited. But if you can talk with your DM and figure out what kind of terrains and creatures you're going to be mostly dealing with, and you don't mind thinking outside of the box to come up with ways to get around situations where you wouldn't normally be as effective, the Ranger is a great class. And because of the way it's set up, it's actually one of the best classes for players that are just starting to learn, because you start out as just a melee combatant, and then you get some spells, and then you get an animal companion, and it all happens level after level, so you can learn a little, and then at the next level, once you've mastered what you've learned, you get something new, and once you've mastered that, you get something new. So it's a great class for learning. Now, if you prefer to be a little devious, you might actually find that the rogue is the way to go. Rogues are your assassins and your thieves and your arcane tricksters. They lie, they cheat, they steal, they backstab their way to victory. They are definitely dexterity based, so hard to hit and deal good finesse damage. They're also going to want high wisdom and constitution, because they require a good amount of health, and they need to be perceptive when checking for traps and stuff. This is definitely what you want to go with if you want to be a skill monkey. You have so much that you can do. You get sneak attacks, which increase your damage, but you have so much you can do with your skills. The only class that holds a candle to a rogue is the bard with their jack of all trades. You can be a scout, you can pick locks, you can take out enemy patrols. You're just so versatile, and that's what the rogue is. It's the most versatile out of all of the classes as far as situations that it can fill at one time. You might get more versatility out of Cleric as far as Cleric in general, but once you've locked yourself into a domain, that's your domain. A rogue is never locked into one place. They can do anything they want. But they're not frontline warriors. They have low HP, and their AC is not very good, so they're not good at prolonged exchanges. And because you're going to be up scouting and be at the forefront, if you have a bad roll and you fail a wisdom check or a disarm trap check, you're going to find yourself in a very sticky situation where you've fallen into a spike pit. We all play Dungeons and Dragons to escape the real world and be part of something fantastical. So if you really want to be something special, you might want to look into being a sorcerer who is born with innate magic talent in their blood. As sorcerers, you're a full caster, and you have sorcery points, which means you get full 9th level spells. You can deal great AoE, you can control, you have great versatility as far as that goes. And your sorcery points can be used to cast more than one spell at a time. You can cast a spell on a cantrip, you can increase the range, you can twin your spells. There are some great things that you can do using the sorcery points mechanic you're given, which is extremely powerful. You can also weave those spells around your friendly allies, so you can cast a fireball that doesn't hurt your friends. But There's also a severe weakness with being a sorcerer. A, you have no AC and super low hit points. And your spell list is very restricted. You make up for that restriction by the ability to do extra things with your sorcery points, but that doesn't mean that the restriction isn't there to balance things out. And so the amount of spells you get to pick from are much more limited. And on top of that, you can't relearn your spells at the start of every day at the end of each long rest. You get them per level. So once you pick a spell, you're stuck with it. You can't change it whenever you want. So this is going to be a great option if you want to be able to do nifty things with spells that others can't. But keep in mind that you have to give some serious thought into what you're doing, because once you've run out of spell slots, you're useless, and if the spells you pick are not helpful for you, you're stuck with them, and you're going to feel like you're limited to nothing but cantrips. Now, if you want to be somebody that's edgy and is serving a godlike being that's not a god, being a warlock is definitely the way to go. You've chosen to sign your soul over, basically, to an eldritch being in exchange for power. You can be their servant, you can be like a priest, it all depends upon you and the DM, but the deal is that in exchange for power from the eldritch being that is your patron, you're given different abilities and arcane magic. You are a full caster, but you're not. The way they're set up is very different. You have very limited amount of spell slots, but all of your spells are at the maximum level of spell slot there is. So all of your spells that scale up are going to deal massive damage because it's always cast at the highest possible level. You are limited in your spells, but you get access to the best cantrip in the game, which is Eldritch Blast. And on top of that, even though you are very limited in your number of actual spell slots, you do get them back every short rest, so you can use them a lot more freely than other classes, despite the fact that they're limited. And you have access to invocations, Eldritch invocations. These can be used to increase the power of your Eldritch Blast, or to provide you with different situations like Devil's Sights, which lets you have 120 feet of dark vision. So there's versatility and utility, as well as great combat ability here. But it is very limited in the amount of spells that you get, even though you can spam them a little more freely because you get them at the end of a long rest. You only have 2 actual spell slots, so you are going to be limited to being a cantripy character if you're in a situation where you can't rest. If your DM is throwing several encounters at you, or you're on a time crunch, you're going to find that your character, who is a main spellcaster, has limited use, because even if you choose to be more of a combat-oriented warlock, which is definitely a thing, your low hit die is going to ensure that you can only do that so much before you have to go to the back line and let other full martial classes take over. Now, if you want to be a tactical thinker and you want to outsmart your foes like the Battlemaster, but you want to have great magical powers, there is no class better for you than the Wizard. They're a full caster. They have an unparalleled spell list that they can prepare from every day to ensure they're ready for whatever is coming up. They have such great versatility. Their spell list is probably the best one that there is. If you are falling from a building, you've got a spell to take care of that. If there's some bad guys clumped together and you need to kill them, you've got a spell for that. You need to infiltrate a tightly patrolled encampment. Guess what? You've got a spell for that. This is the character that has an app for that. There is nothing that they can't do with the magic that they've learned through their studies. But because of that, because they're so heavily into magic, they have nothing to speak of on the martial side. And they have some charisma, but they're usually not as charismatic, so there's limited ability in roleplay too. Their biggest ability is in intelligence, which is one of, if not the most useless stat in the game, simply because there's a lack of saving throw and skill overlap. But that doesn't make it bad. It's, like I said, you have a spell for that, for anything that you need to do. So even though you have low AC and HP, you're staying out of the fist fights, you're staying out of the bar brawls, and you're instead casting from a distance, and you have a spell for whatever situation arises. So it's the skill monkey of magic. So these are the 13 different classes and their basic strengths and weaknesses and what you're looking at when you use them. My personal favorites for me are the charismatic ones, the Bard, the Paladin, the Warlock. But all of them have great strengths and great weaknesses depending on the situation. You can't pick wrong. Just look at what it is that you want to do and see what matches. Because just like the wizards have an app for that, the classes have a class for you, for whatever it is that you want to do in the game. Just figure out what it is that you want, what sounds the most appealing for you, and reference what we've just gone over to figure out what it is you want to do. And once you figure that out, leave a comment down below after clicking the like button and let me know what class it is that you like the most, or what class it is that you'll be using, because I'm very curious to know how you feel about it. Anyway, thank you for tuning in to this episode of D&D 20, where we've gone over the different classes that you can pick from. I hope that this helped you figure out what it is that you want to do in your D&D life. And I look forward to seeing you next time. And until then, may your adventures be many.